Welcome to the Jason de Sousa Show. Join us as we explore the evolving urban landscape, uncovering the trends, stories, and innovations shaping our cities. Thanks for watching and enjoy today's episode.
Smita Sharma, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Jason. Good to be here.
So you're a veteran journalist. I think you've been in the field 22 years, an independent journalist, and you're a visiting fellow at the Kautilya School of Public Policy and the former host or current host of the Beyond Nation State podcast. So it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much. Veteran kind of dates us, no? Just call us journalists.
Well, you know, my 10-year-old daughter told me the other day, Dad, I'm going to be real with you. And I'm like, your jokes aren't funny. I'm like, oh dear. Well, that dated me pretty quickly.
You crack a lot of the daddy jokes.
Well, what it means is that, you know, the days of being a hero to your young children are no longer the case. They've sort of outgrown your humor, which really does date you.
That's sad.
Yeah. Well, it's great. So, hey, really great to have you on the show, particularly now. There's so much going on in your part of the world. And I think when we spoke, I mentioned, you know, being an Australian-based podcast, you know, we don't really get a lot about what's going on in the subcontinent, despite the fact that we've got a very large Indian population here. And I always think that's rather odd. So I think you've been traveling around. There's last time we spoke, you were on your way into an Indian Army press conference just on the edge of Operation Sindoor. What's the mood on the ground right now post this whole attack in Kashmir, post the return fire events between India and Pakistan? What is the mood on the ground now?
Yeah, you're right. I think I was just entering one of the major briefings that was taking place for Operation Sindoor. And it was a joint military briefing by, in fact, you know, the Director General of Military Operation and the Director General for the air services and naval services, and an important one. You know, the mood, of course, on the surface of it, of course, things are normal. I mean, people are going about their daily lives. People who are the worst affected are the people who actually live in those border areas, people who live along the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir, villagers who have had their lives displaced for the nth time, because these conflicts are decades old now. And every time the situation blows up, they're the first ones who have to leave their cattle behind, their land behind, move out. There are lives of civilians that are lost in shelling. Of course, there are lives of men in uniform that are lost to consistent acts of cross-border terrorism. So as a country, I think there is still that it's absolutely fresh what happened in Pahalgam, which is one of the very well-known tourist spots in Jammu and Kashmir. And this was in particular a meadow area, which had only recently been opened up to tourists. You know, it was a sensitive spot. It wasn't opened some years ago. But on 22nd April, I mean, you know, the sheer brutality of the terror incident that took place, it was a massacre. Because the way people were identified on the basis of their religion, they were asked to recite verses from the Quran. If they couldn't, their pants were stripped off to see whether they were Hindus or Muslims. And, you know, at the end of the day, they were all identified and killed and gunned down in cold blood because they were Hindus. Of course, there was a local Kashmiri Muslim tour guide also who lost his life in an attempt to try and save others. And, you know, he was a hero. So were many other people who opened up their homes, who opened up their roofs for stranded tourists in the next few days, who were the first responders in a way to the crisis. And the sheer brutality of it. Look, for India, you know, terror attacks is something that we have dealt with. We've had very problematic borders. We belong to a part of the region where we have faced militancy, insurgency, cross-border terrorism. We have long borders that we share with several of our neighbors. And South Asia is really, I mean, you know, it's a very difficult spot to be in when you have neighbors which are constantly in a state of either political turmoil or autocratic rules, or there are military coups that are happening, democracy is still fledgling. So for India, it's actually a matter of great pride that, you know, as one of the largest countries in this region, and we continue to be the largest democracy in the world, that our institutions have stood. We have multiple domestic challenges today. We have multiple political challenges today. And I'm a vocal critic of all of those. But still, having said that, I think India takes pride in the fact that we have been a democracy that is hailed on the world stage. So, but our terror attacks is something that we have constantly faced as citizens. But some of the terror attacks, their brutality, that sort of crosses all thresholds, and then you have to draw new red lines. So whether it was the parliament attack in 2001, where the temple of democracy, the parliament, was attacked by terrorists, or whether it was the horrible terror attack that played out, in a live hostage situation, in live firing situation in the financial capital of Mumbai in 2008 that killed many foreign nationals too. I think there were Australians too who were killed in those attacks.
I was there a couple of weeks later, just after that.
Oh, you were? Oh, yeah. I mean, there are a couple of places there, that still have those gunshots on the walls. Leopold Cafe,
absolutely.
for instance. People go in there and they see those gunshots. Entire generations that, they came out of school and they saw this attack happening, this bloodshed happening. So whatever little possibility there had been of a reset in ties with a neighbor like Pakistan, because in 2003 to 7, we did see a period of sort of confidence building measures happening, and there were reasons for that. We'll go into it later on. But every generation gets scarred. A fresh generation gets traumatized and scarred with every brutal carnage that takes place. So similarly in Pahalgam, imagine the kind of people who were there. I mean, there's a young Navy officer, just married, is out there on a honeymoon with his wife, making reels, clicking photographs. He gets killed. There are people from intelligence bureau. There are young children. There is this video that went viral of this man who was essentially on the zip line.
Yeah, I saw it. And you can see people being killed in the background, and he's smiling on the zip line. And
because
people are being murdered.
realize.
He doesn't know, right? And I saw that video. I was horrified. Like, I've never seen anything like it.
It's chilling. I mean, he's on the zip line making a selfie of himself, recording his video, and people running helter-skelter behind him in the background.
And people being
then,
killed.
of course, flopping dead on the ground as they are killed.
So I didn't realize it was as focused as I just thought it was and this again shows why we need to have this conversation, that it was a massacre. That was evident from the international media, but the actual targeting of Hindus was not, I think, clear.
Yeah, so I think, this is something that we have had conversations about. Look, I belong to an independent platform, and I am an independent journalist here, Jason. For 22 years, for the larger part of my journalism career, I've actually worked with mainstream television media, some of the leading outlets, as foreign policy editor, as an anchoring primetime shows here, or whether I've also worked with print news houses. But there's a reason why I, shifted to the independent space in the last few years, because there has been a severe decline as far as iconic, in particular, television newsrooms in India is concerned, where all of them have become aligned with the government narrative of the day, where they have stopped doing the basics of journalism, which is asking questions to those in positions of authority. But having said that, even for me, somebody who's constantly questioning the government of the day, who's known as a critical voice, I do feel that there is a problem when it comes to a lot of the Western nations and their media covering stories in our parts of the region, in countries like India, because those lexicons change. There are inherent biases. There are inherent hypocrisies. Of course, I completely condemn any move to try and ever block media houses, to try and withhold social media accounts of media houses. I don't think that's the way forward. You need to go out there and present your part of the narrative. You need to improve on your communication strategy to be heard better. So a lot of the Western media also does tend to overlook a lot of these issues, where while I question my government constantly on what we see as a severe discriminatory policy against the country's Muslims and minorities, and there are problematic policy issues too, at the same time, you need to state what has happened. If Hindus have been killed because they were Hindus, you need to state that. You cannot sugarcoat that. You cannot gloss over that.
And that's right. And I do reflect a little bit on that. I mean, one of the things that I notice in Western media is that there isn't really a delineation between India and Pakistan. They say India and Pakistan. Oh, it's something and it's this hyphen, India and Pakistan. And so, whereas of course, India doesn't view themselves as India and Pakistan. It's just India. Pakistan doesn't view themselves as Pakistan and India. It's just Pakistan. They're separate countries with separate agendas and separate things. And they're often in the media just sort of clumped together and said, well, really, they're the same country and they should just work things out, right? And that isn't the case at all. I think that's one of the fascinating. Also, the interesting view on Indian media. I don't watch enough of it, I suppose. But one thing I would say, I watch a lot of independent stuff. I now am a fan of your channel, and you should check out Smita Sharma on her YouTube channel. There's
Thank you
plenty in
so
English
much.
as well as in Hindi, and there's plenty of Hindi speakers out there. But you know, there's a great channel called The Prince. I think that's a pretty good media channel. There's a few others, but when I watch mainstream Indian news, it's very loud. It's very loud. It's very repetitive. It's very, it's very, exclusive. And then it's a lot of yelling, right? And I find that interesting. One side of me says, well, that's good. That's a functioning democracy. You got these 9,000 media channels yelling, but another sort of, I guess, more, I don't want to say sinister, but sinister angle to that is you're right. They are all trumpeting the same thing, and there's a lot of pro-government paraphernalia going on.
I mean, we can have long discussion on the media scenarios. It's also a part of something that I teach in my elective to students of public policy. And I've spoken about it in global capitals too, where I've visited, including, in Australia. One of my first visits to Australia was actually soon after, the time when, unfortunately, Australia was making news for the wrong reasons in Indian
this is
newsrooms.
the students,
Yes, the
students,
the racist attacks and the criminal attacks and the education institution mushrooming. I'm glad we've come a long way since then. So I went to Australia as part of a John Doherty fellowship, and I was with the ABC network there for a week. And I remember the ABC hadn't gone 24/7 then. And India had completely mushroomed into 24/7 news channels.
Yes, absolutely.
That was screaming for attention. Of course, those were still sober days. Those were still days of professional television newsrooms. This sharp decline has been in the last 4-5 years in particular. And half the Australian fellow journalists would be so wide-eyed, and the anchors would be like, please do not share your work schedules with our producers, because that's not what we want. To happen to us, because we were working like 16, 17 hours a day. We were reporting, anchoring, producing, and the entire setup had mushroomed. But now the problem is that, like the polarization in India, which has also been driven, of course, by the rise of a majoritarian government over the last 10 years, led by a strongman Prime Minister Modi, that has also seeped into newsrooms. So newsrooms are all split vertically, they are polarized, and you see the entire circus of communal narratives and debates constantly occupying entire space across primetime debates, with very little or no focus on issues of governance, issues of policies, issues that really impact people, whether it's economy, whether it's climate change. So that has been a severe decline, which is very, very worrisome. I mean, we have 900 television stations today, Jason, of which more than 450 plus are 24/7 news channels.
Oh, really?
Of which only a handful are actually in English and in Hindi, which is largely spoken. Most of them are vernacular. They're regional channels. Every state has a flourishing network of channels today. So it's the boom in television happened much more than it happened in print, which is still stable. In India, you have newspapers which are extremely reputed and respected, whether it's the Hindu, whether it's Tribune, Telegraph, Indian Express, papers that are more than 100 years old, papers that are still seeking truth to power, that are doing their job. But I think the problematic area has been television, and then this digital growth, which is in a way also offered journalists that space to come in and function independently. But it's also become a space where there is so much of disinformation, misinformation. There are extreme positions taken by a lot of these journalists, where the lines are blurred now between being a journalist and an influencer, commentator, not really doing ground reportages anymore, because that's more expensive, time-taking, needs resources, needs patience. So it's a problematic space. So in India, I think, and when it comes to situations like the Pahalgam terrorist attack, when it comes to a heated direct military escalation between India and Pakistan, then these situations become very problematic, because according to our television stations, the Indian armed forces had literally gone in and occupied Islamabad. They had they had captured Lahore. They had completely burnt Karachi port. So for an average viewer who was hooked to that TV station, this was the amount of misinformation that was coming in, not through social media, not through YouTube, but through TV stations that were beaming directly into TV homes, and which was problematic. Because remember, I mean, India, what it did under Operation Sindoor, the retaliation which happened on 7th of May, where Indian armed forces, without crossing the international boundary, they struck at prime locations 9 terror sites in Pakistan-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and in Bahawalpur, in the heart of southern Punjab in Pakistan, which is the hot belt where the Pakistan military also draws its strength from, where the terror network also thrives, where also, organizations like Lashkar-e-Jhangvi, which causes sectarian violence, actually thrive. It's a hotbed, it's a cocktail, and Punjab's elite politicians, they're all there. So when India struck these sites, India has taken a clear position and said, look, we have only struck at terror infrastructure, which basically launched these horrendous attacks, whether it was in 2019 in Pulwama that killed 40 Indian soldiers, or in Pahalgam that killed 26 civilians, including one national from Nepal. So India didn't want this message to go out that India was just randomly striking and military invading. Military invasion is not a history of India. And when you have Indian television channels, on the contrary, reporting that armed forces have marched into Lahore, the tanks have taken over Karachi, Islamabad, it's contrary to the very sort of matured narrative that the Indian state is putting out. So they are not doing a service to national security by being so loud and screaming and shouting. And that's something I hope at some point the top editors and proprietors start to introspect on.
Fascinating. I mean, because we haven't had any of that here, right? We haven't had any of
Thank
that
God
sort
for
of
small
media.
mercies, Jason.
We certainly haven't had, India's occupying Pakistan or any of that sort of stuff. Like we had a very sort of, there was a terrorist attack. There wasn't a tremendous amount of detail about it. It was brutal. I've learned something already about the nature of that attack. It follows a history of attacks. That was the sort of narrative. And the Indian state has struck back in Pakistan. And oh, by the way, President Trump came in and calmed it all down. That's sort of the narrative. And that last part, I know, has really got people riled up. But I want to come back to that because I think you mentioned the Indian Foreign Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, and I've been listening a little bit to the perspectives he's been putting forward, and he's quite articulate on the world stage. He's one of the more articulate foreign diplomats, and he's got a bit of a fan base now because he is quite articulate. But he made the point. He said that you never hear of Indian-sponsored terrorism in Pakistan. You don't hear that story. You don't hear that that you only hear of Pakistan-sponsored terrorism in India, or Muslim, may I say carefully, sponsored terrorism in India, or extremist Islamic terrorism in India. I sort of get the sense that the perspective Mr. Jaishankar and other Indian politicians are putting forward is that of India a rising, one that's focused on its economic development, that's focused on its role in international affairs, and really one that sees Pakistan more as an irritant than anything else. Is that a fair sort of perspective?
Well, I wouldn't call Pakistan an irritant, but as the former prime minister had said, that you can change your friends, but you cannot change your neighbor. So
well, that's right.
India is unfortunately stuck with its borders, with its neighbors. The distance between the two sides of Punjab, the Indian Punjab. I don't know if you have Indian roots, Jason, by any chance?
I do, from Goa.
If your family.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
So,
nice.
so
Okay.
it's a bit of a different part of India to many of these discussions. But yes, the
Yeah,
BJP
but
is
again,
in power in Goa, by the way. So,
Oh yes, and there's so much of history there too, and the Portuguese colonial history, all of it. But if you go to Amritsar in Punjab, which is on the Indian side, and the distance to Lahore, it's just a matter of a few kilometers. The land border that separates Amritsar and Lahore, which is called Atari on the Indian side, Wagah on the Pakistani side. And that's the one functional land border which has now also been shut down since the attack, because India announced a slew of diplomatic measures where the diplomatic staff was further reduced. The high commissioners had already been, in fact, recalled. after the abrogation of Article 370 that removed the special status of Jammu and Kashmir to the Indian Constitution in 2019 under the Modi government. So it's just a matter of less than 50 kilometers that we are talking about. And if you look at even the terror sites that India has struck across, the Pakistan-occupied Jammu Kashmir, across the line of control and international border, these are all in a range of 20 to 25 kilometers.
Right. So it wasn't really a deep.
Kilometers.
It wasn't a deep in Pakistan event that was going on.
No,
in terms
100
of the
kilometers,
response.
which is Bahawalpur in the south, in the heart of Punjab. That was like a new message from India. So far, look, India had never taken to. It had conducted surgical strikes in the past in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, but these were things that previous governments had not really, drummed about or talked about so much.
Yeah.
With this government, when we saw the Uri terror strikes that killed 19 Indian soldiers, that kind of started to shift the paradigm. After the 2008 Mumbai terror attacks, we saw, of course, there were 9 terrorists that were killed. There was one terrorist who was captured alive, which was Ajmal Qasab. He went through a process of trial for many years in India before, of course, he was executed to death. And India gave that free trial process. India went to the United Nations. India submitted dossiers of evidence against the Lashkar-e-Taiba, the organization responsible for it, led by Hafiz Saeed. This was also the time when the United Nations Security Council listed Hafiz Saeed and Lashkar-e-Taiba as proscribed, as globally proscribed terror organizations. India did all that. Over the years, India has resorted to diplomatic measures, economic measures, a slew of measures. They've not been working. At the end of the day, Pakistan's problem still remains when it comes to its obsession with Kashmir that it calls the jugular vein, when it comes to its doctrine, which was articulated, way back by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto when he was not the prime minister. He was actually a rising figure in then the Ayub Khan administration. In 1965, he went to the United Nations Security Council and he said that Pakistan would wage 1,000 years war against India. This was again repeated, in fact, by Ziaul Haq, who later on overthrew actually Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and when he came in, he also said that Pakistan would continue to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. That remains at the heart of Pakistan's doctrine today. So while Pakistan and Pakistan armed forces, for them, Kashmir and anti-India sentiments remain aglow, India has grown manifold. I mean, whether it's our population sizes, whether it's our GDPs. Look, China's GDP today is 4.5 to 5 times more than India. But India's GDP is also hugely more than Pakistan.
And starting to catch up with China, right, as well.
Well, we are hoping to. It will take a long time, to be realistic, honestly speaking, because, we are only close to a $5 trillion economy right now. We are looking at China, which is, close to $20 trillion economy. And if you look at Pakistan's GDP, is only around $373 billion or something like that. So, those gaps are huge and they speak for themselves. I mean, Indians are shining across the world today. Indians are part of governments. The Indian diaspora have become huge brand ambassadors for the country, including in Australia, whether it's in the United States, whether it's space. India's interests with the United States today is not just on defense. It is on emerging critical technology supplies. There's a reason that its nuclear proliferation records have been clean. And that's why, you had the US allowing India to come into that high nuclear club. When we got that civilian nuclear deal under the Manmohan Singh government, you have Indians reaching space. You have Indians launching satellites for other countries today. So there are huge strides that India has made in all spheres of life. For India, the competitor, the main adversary is China. But for China, it is easier for India to pin it within the region with, of course, all the support that it can give to Pakistan, to other countries in the region, for constantly keeping things on the border, on the boil. Whereas for China, the main competition is, of course, the United States. So these are all geopolitical chess games that are happening with different aspirations and ambitions. And India is not interested in militarily invading. In terms of Balochistan that you mentioned, over the years, India has gone to the Security Council with proof to the members, and which is a reason why you have so many proscribed terror organizations today, all with links and roots in Pakistan, whether it's Jaish-e-Mohammed, whether it's Lashkar-e-Taiba, the resistance force, which is blamed for the Pahalgam terrorist attack, which actually first took responsibility for these attacks twice. The message was also amplified by the Lashkar-Taiba, and then later on they withdrew. They said that we are not responsible for it, but India holds that group responsible. It's a group India has already been highlighting in the Security Council in the last 2-3 years, and India wants to get that listed too. Or whether it's Al Qaeda, the world knows Al Qaeda, and Osama bin Laden being found in Abbottabad. So globally, of course, there's a reason why there is a certain image of Pakistan when it comes to the kind of terrorism that breeds. And it's sad. I think it's sad for Pakistani citizens, Jason. Look, I've traveled in Pakistan many a times. I've traveled across the country many a times. When you talk to the ordinary Pakistani, who will always highlight the shared language, culture with Indians, who will have a certain warmth in their hearts. But I think with every such incident, what happens is whatever little dialogue, constituency for dialogue and peace that you have, you're killing it.
Yeah.
Even for those of us who so far were labeled as, oh, you guys go and light candles when people die in terrorism, because every time we say that, Georgia is better than war. When something like Pahalgam happens, how do you even go and advocate peace and dialogue anymore? It leaves the very best advocates of peace also kind of, dumbfounded and without any reason to further justify. At this moment, somebody like Shashi Tharoor, again, who's very popular in Australia. He served in the United Nations for a long time. He's part of the multi-party delegations. He's leading one of the delegations that India is sending out to global capitals to make a case for its resolve on the fight on terrorism and Pakistan's role in it. Extremely articulate. He used to be somebody who used to talk about peace with Pakistan. No more.
No, far from it, right? Far from it.
Yeah.
And I want to come to him actually, because his role in this current, I guess, international delegation is quite interesting. But before we get to it, I just want to go back to your point on people-to-people dialogue, because that's always struck me as odd. That I always think of India, Pakistan being really of the same blood, right? Before partition, the people were of the same blood. The partition happened, and then that's created this sort of constant historical now tension between the two countries. And why do you think that is? What is the background, do you think, that has caused, what was it in the nation state infrastructure of Pakistan that has caused it to have this perpetual view of India as the enemy?
Well, the very foundation of Pakistan is the basis of religion. The very foundation of Pakistan was the two-nation theory propounded by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. I mean, when the subcontinent was being partitioned after the entire British colonial rule in 1947, why Jinnah and the founders of Pakistan wanted a separate Pakistan was strictly on the basis of religion. They wanted it to be a Muslim nation.
They did, but I had read that Jinnah had felt that he would still travel freely into India and be a part of India, and that there would be people-to-people links. And yes, it was a separate state based on religion, but not necessarily.
The problem is Jinnah's image, of course. In parts, if you read, he comes across as this liberal guy, cigar-smoking guy who wasn't really deeply rooted into conservative religion. But I think it's Pakistan's destiny that it has had continuous military overthrows of civilian government. Democracy never really had a true chance. I remember in 2013, when elections were taking place and Nawaz Sharif had returned from exile. I mean, in all its decades of existence, essentially between the Bhuttos and the Sharifs, who have been the prime ministers of the country, most of them have either been forced to live in exile because the army has overthrown. There has been coups that have happened. The popular saying is that most countries have professional armed forces. In Pakistan, the armed forces have a country.
Yes,
because it's the armed forces that are calling the shots. So even now you have a Shahbaz Sharif who's the prime minister. But the larger opinion and the viewpoint is that it's internally it may have a little say on economy and stuff. When it comes to national security, when it comes to borders, it's a puppet regime. And
it seems to me that this terrorist attack couldn't have come at a worse time for Pakistan. I mean, it's a country in significant economic crisis. It went through a whole bunch of embarrassment over the imprisonment of Imran Khan, and no one believes that any of those charges were real. I guess, at least internationally, it has a massive fiscal imbalance. really viewed as a client state of China. Is this really a time for it to sort of be, engaged in this sort of activity?
Nations that are not functioning normally, all these reasons that you give could perhaps be the best of reasons for the army to do something.
Why it should
like
happen,
this.
yes. So let's hide our problems. Let's create a war.
You look at the neocons, the quintessential neocon theory. When you have a domestic problem in the US, an external war is always the solution. And look at what has happened now. Asim Munir, the general, the Pakistan army chief, just a few days before the Pahalgam terrorist attack, he made an extremely rabid speech where he spoke about, again, Kashmir being the jugular vein. He spoke about how Hindus and Muslims are very different and they can never coexist together, so much so. That was the meaning. And then this attack, I'm not happening that this attack was a straightaway outcome of that speech, but you get these signals. And then look at what has happened today. I mean, he's bought time for himself, perhaps. With all that was happening, the country is again sort of, the moment it comes to national security, when there is so much of triumphalism, he's going around celebrating Operation Sindoor as a victory over India. When there is so much of nationalism and jingoism, that is there both in India and Pakistan.
This was the shooting down of Indian jets, I think, was one of the things.
The reports which India has neither confirmed nor denied. Yeah. And so Asim Munir has just promoted himself to field marshal. I mean, for crying out loud. He
promoted himself.
It's a joke. He promoted himself. It's like I come to the HR. The HR is me. I look at the mirror and I say, "Oh, you did a good job." Pat myself on the back, and I promote. The last time somebody promoted himself was actually General Ayub Khan. He also promoted himself. And then you had the Bangladesh Liberation War that happened, where India, of course, played that very important role, and which has remained one of the very reasons why Pakistan continuously has this attitude towards India, wanting to cut it, bleed it.
Because it's a way of covering itself, its own problems.
Also, it's a way of avenging what happened. When East Pakistan and West Pakistan fought, and Bangladesh was born out of it with the help of India's military. And then you had the Simla agreement that was signed in 1972 between the two countries, where it was also decided to keep issues mutual. So Simla agreement is actually one of the foundational pacts which talks about that the two countries will essentially resolve their problems, including Kashmir, bilaterally or through mutual understanding, of finding ways. So, so for Pakistan, I think for Asim Munir, if you look at now, he's promoting himself to field marshal, he's celebrating. So sometimes when you have a whole bunch of problems, and plus the fact that Americans had pulled out of Afghanistan, that NATO was not there in Afghanistan anymore, because for the longest time, when actually if you look at the genesis of, the roots of all the terrorism problems that started off in Kashmir in India, it's in the late 80s. That's a time when Pakistan pushed out, the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, and Pakistan was, of course, playing the prime role. It was backed by United States and Saudi. You recently had the Pakistani Defense Minister Khwaja Asif in an interview talk about how they had been doing the dirty tricks and dirty jobs for the United States for the longest, and that's when the terror group also mushroomed. That created a furor.
I saw that interview with the Pakistani Defense Minister, and that was an amazing statement. Yeah, well, he did that. That made international media. We've been doing the dirty work for the United States.
Dirty work. So for Pakistan, with Asim Munir, the kind of situation that he is in, all these things add up. Then that and then you have the US speaking about. You have a Donald Trump who's again speaking about India and Pakistan in the same breath, and
in the same sentence. This hyphenation of the two countries, right?
Which India
in this case, it was clear there was an aggressor and a victim, right? So there shouldn't be a hyphen.
And India had moved out of this hyphenation bracket in the last 2 decades.
Yeah.
India is again facing that problem, and Pakistan is happy about it, because
it's actually a point that Shashi Tharoor raises quite a lot. That actually the diplomatic efforts of India over a long period of time have been say, if you visit India, please don't go on to visit Pakistan. We're not the same. It's not the same.
In the 90s, it was a practice. After India faced sanctions from the Bill Clinton regime because of its nuclear tests. And then, of course, you had the Kargil war that happened. There was a US rule that did happen to try and calm down things. But India has not wanted to be hyphenated with Pakistan. It's like, we are a different country. We are a democratic nation. Let's just work on our strengths and focuses. So the Pakistanis obviously have a reason to be happy right now because the United States is back again focusing in the region which it had pulled out of. The order was passed during Trump's first term. It was executed in a very shoddy manner when troops were pulled out of Afghanistan under Biden. But now again, the US is forced to talk, and so much so, Trump is a loudmouth. But at the end of the day, he's still occupying the strongest and the most, the highest position. He's the president of the global superpower. So you cannot just ignore his.
You can't ignore him, right? Yeah.
In 11 days, 8 times he has said now that I brokered the ceasefire, something that India denies.
Yeah.
And he keeps saying that I have told them that I will do trade with you. I mean, what is he going to trade with Pakistan is something that I really want to know. Pakistan really doesn't manufacture or supply things other than organizations rooted in terror. And calling Asim Munir and Modi and Shahbaz Sharif as great leaders in the same breath.
I didn't realize he'd done that. Yeah.
Look, two great leaders.
That's a good segue, actually, because into leadership, because I think, Prime Minister Modi now is a cemented world leader. He is celebrated, around the world. When he comes to speak, he fills stadiums. In fact, when he came to Australia, he filled an entire stadium, so much so you had, the Australian Prime Minister and a cavalcade of other politicians just dying to share the limelight with him because
calling him a rock star, which
rock star. We had people. We had an entire train from Melbourne to Sydney filled with Indian people coming to Sydney to watch him speak. It was extraordinary, right? It's a image, I think, now of a prime minister that wants to be more involved in the global discussion with really clear speaking diplomats. Around expressing an Indian view. Interesting that had Vice President J.D. Vance visit India recently with his wife, who is of Indian origin and still lives quite. Her family is Indian, and talking about the Prime Minister as almost an uncle to his children. This is the sort of
he was actually in India when the Pahalgam terrorist attack happened.
Well, okay, there you go. Right, so that's right. I remember that. Right, so what is the view of a local Indian, a resident Indian of this internationalization of India? Are they proud of their prime minister doing this, or are they looking back and saying, look, we've got a lot of problems here. Wouldn't it be nice if you focused more on India?
Here I'll say what, Jason, that of course his core constituency, and which is a significant more than 40% that votes the BJP, is obviously proud of everything that he does. I mean, as a prime minister of this country, we do want the prime minister to take the best, the decisions in the best interest of this country. But I would like to mention here that we also need to sift a little bit of hyperbole and political rhetoric from what is real. And the fact is that India's evolution on the world stage hasn't happened just in the last 10 years. It's not just because of the BJP government led by Prime Minister Modi. Successive governments under successive prime ministers have made very, very important decisions that have led to this rise. I mean, in 2008, when the global financial crisis happened, it was Prime Minister Manmohan Singh of the Congress, a noted economist, somebody who had worked with the biggest banks in the world, who was very, very reputed. He steered India's economy.
Yeah, very well respected.
He steered India's economy. We managed to be stable. We managed to remain on our feet and our head held high. So, and it was Dr. Manmohan Singh again, whose government, I mean, he was a quintessential political outsider. He was not elected to be prime minister. He was nominated to be prime minister by Sonia Gandhi, who was the president of the Congress. And the Congress had won surprisingly in 2004, when the then Vajpayee government had run an entire campaign called India Shining. The deputy prime minister was Lal Krishna Advani, who was the original poster boy of Hindutva in the country. I had traveled with Mr. Advani massively in this yatra that he had done pan-India. It was on the road. I traveled thousands of kilometers with him on the road. But they lost, and you had a coalition government come back into power in 2004, which was, the Congress was the single largest party. Dr. Manmohan Singh was nominated by Sonia Gandhi to become the prime minister. In the first term, of course, he did a fabulous job. That's when also India's positions with the United States changed, when George W. Bush and Manmohan Singh did the heavy lifting, whether it was about India getting that civil nuclear deal through that gave it a place on the nuclear high table, after having been treated as a pariah state, whether it was the defense framework that was executed with the United States. So there are successive governments that have actually worked to the India that we see today. Let's not belittle the contributions of all the previous governments, because this government would want its constituents to believe that essentially India was born in the last 10 years, that essentially India has risen to power in 10 years. The popular saying here is, ki passport wazandar ho gaya hai, that your passport has become heavier now. Whereas actually, on the contrary,
is that right? I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, Indians are facing a lot of problems globally. There are issues that we have now. I mean, there are genuine problems where a lot is desired on India's diplomatic front, even with Operation Sindoor, which, oh, by the way, I think your viewers would like to know that the name Sindoor essentially means vermilion, which married Hindu women apply on their forehead as a tilak.
Oh, okay. Yes, yes.
So Operation Sindoor was a political optic of it was essentially that because when terror strikes happened and married women become widows and you ruin families, and B, also to do with the BJP's own Hindutva base, where Sindoor, vermilion have significance.
And just explain that word Hindutva, because I think that's not something that's sort of well understood here. It's sort of Hindu nationalism. Is that what you describe it as?
It's Hindu nationalism. It's the political manifestation of Hinduism. Look,
okay.
What Hindutva is very different from Hinduism. Hinduism is a way of life. It's a spiritual way of life. Hinduism is fluid. Hinduism is inclusive. Hinduism teaches us to evolve. Hindutva is its political manifestation, much like Zionism.
Right.
So, and Hindutva is what, where the BJP in the 80s actually had 2 seats in parliament. And it was Lal Krishna Advani who did this procession across India, which then unfortunately turned into this hugely communal strife, led to bomb attacks across the country, riots across the country. And it won on the planks of nationalist rhetoric combined with cultural nationalism. So that's the Hindutva plank of the BJP. And, so what
and you would argue that it's been quite successful in raising the profile of, I'm going to call it Hindu nationalism, for want of a better term, in India, because certainly, I mean, my family is Catholic from Goa. There's quite a few Catholics in Goa, as you'd imagine. There is a feeling that sort of non-Hindu religions sort of feel a little less comfortable in India than they used to. I'm just reflecting that. Is that a fact? Do you think that do you think that is the case?
There are problems. There are problems, as I mentioned earlier. Also, there are a lot of discriminatory policies today that are happening against minorities, particularly in Muslims. I mean, the BJP's image has changed. Look, since the rise of Prime Minister Modi, what has happened is BJP is no longer a party only of the Hindus, the Hindu nationalists. BJP has managed to expand its base. It is today a pan-India. I mean, few years back, we wouldn't have thought, nobody would have thought that BJP could actually win a state like Goa, where you had Christian minorities in dominating, or that the BJP would win states in India's northeast, or that it would actually have roadways in southern Indian states where identities are framed around linguistic battles, around cultural battles, where there has been a traditional fight against the domination of Hindi as a spoken language. The entire Dravidian movement in the south was based on linguistic identity. And for the BJP, it's very important that they want to make Hindi as the national language of India. India doesn't have a national language. India has official languages. And English is kind of, language which is widely spoken other than Hindi. So it's the lingua franca in a way. And Hindi, of course,
which gives India its strength, right? It gives India a strength that it has English as a major language. I mean, that's one of the challenges
India's
for China.
rise in the 90s and 2000s. If you saw the rise in the in the Indian diaspora capital, or Indians going to Silicon Valley and working, it was all because Indians
of their language
knew English very well. They had an advantage over others. So that didn't matter. But within India, of course, the imposition of Hindi language is a very sensitive issue, because at the end of the day, India's strength, and I think if Operation Pahalgam has driven home something once again, is this very fact that India's strength lies in unity in diversity, which is very important for this government to realize, because this government, unfortunately, there have been allegations against this government of wanting to disenfranchise your minorities, of not giving them seats in parliament, of not giving them tickets from your party, lynching, of demolishing their homes without adequate legal proof or trial every time there is a minority face that's involved in some sort of an accusation. So the way the law works is very different for what it works for Hindus versus the majoritarian Hindus versus minorities, and this has risen. This sort of schism has deepened in the last few years, unfortunately. So that needs a course correction. And Operation Sindoor, when the first briefing happened, the optics of it, who were on stage? We had Colonel Sophia Qureshi. She is a Muslim, colonel of the Indian Army. You had Wing Commander Vyomika Singh, a Hindu, of the Indian Air Force, and of course, our armed forces have never had religious divides.
What was the significance, do you think, of both senior officers being women? Was that a deliberate thing, or do you think,
deliberate?
it was a deliberate?
Because these two were, it was Vikram Misri, the Indian Foreign Secretary, was flanked by these two women officers. Because when you were talking about Operation Sindoor, you were talking about families getting devastated because of terrorism. I think to show that there are women out there, it sends a very strong message, both from an optics point of view, perspective point of view, and then importantly to show that you had a Kashmiri Pandit foreign secretary flanked by Hindu Muslim officers, that this is the idea of India, that India is really not just a nation. India is an idea that transcends, that nation state concept. India's beauty lies in its multi-layered existence, which has survived decades and centuries of civilization. So the fact that they wanted to, and the point that India has been making, that one of the other objectives of this Pahalgam terror attack, where Hindus were gunned down in cold blood, was to try and light up more communal sort of situations and flare up communal divides across the country. So they wanted to send out that message, the community, look, we are united. You cannot do that. You cannot polarize. So which is good. But it's also something that once this entire fog of war is over, domestically, the BJP must continue with, because there are serious allegations against them, that it's problematic, that the politics that they do, and that needs to be addressed. And that's where I think Prime Minister Modi, while he may be, of course, he's a strong man. Of course, he has huge numbers in parliament. In the last general elections, his numbers were reduced. They were hoping for 400. Yeah. They came back. They had to go into coalition mode again. They have two parties now, one from Andhra Pradesh, one from Bihar, which are important coalition partners. But sometimes you do need to, tone down maybe on the rhetoric, on the optics of it, because at the end of the day, when you look at substance today, my problem with Operation Sindoor is militarily, I do not have any doubt that the armed forces gave a very strong reply to where it had to be. They did draw new red lines. They did tell Pakistan that, look, while you may not be changing your behavior on cross-border terrorism in the days to come, at least there will be a higher escalated cost of every time you think you want to promote cross-border terrorism. But that does also leave the question open of what is going to be the next threshold, because India has said that the next act of terror will be an act of war. So you are now left on a higher escalatory ladder, which is problematic for a country like India, which ideally we should be focused on our economy. Our GDP is growing steadily. We are heading towards becoming the third largest economy in the world. And B, I think it has also led to a lot of thinking. Look, a lot of, Narendra Modi supporters are amongst the biggest cheerleaders and fans of Donald Trump. When he won. There were prayers being held in India for his election victory. Really? People were cutting cakes and feeding cake to Trump posters, because they somehow think that Hindutva and conservative republicanism, under the conservative republics, that they're related, they're strong men. But Donald Trump has just been so transactional with every country, in particular India. And for India, which had actually moved so much closer to the United States in the past 2 decades, since the UPA government to this government, India is an important part of Quad, where Australia is there, Japan is there, US is there as a counterweight to China in the Indo-Pacific. It's very clear that while all of these countries and trusted partners that India today works with, they were very clear in their condemnation of the terrorist attacks, barring the exception of countries like Turkey, China, Bangladesh, where the condemnations either came in very late or they were very vaguely worded. But when it came to India's right to defend itself through this military escalation, these countries have actually not stood with India so much. They
Fascinating.
essentially rushed in to ask for de-escalation, to ask for constraint, to ask for restraint, trying to, even the G7 put out a statement, again asking for restraint. So, which is problematic for India, because India does believe that India, if US can go in on the kill and neutralize and kill an Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, why this hypocrisy of not supporting? And when the countries can turn a complete blind eye to what is happening in Gaza today with the Israelis, it is only now that we are suddenly seeing countries try and change side and actually call it a genocide. With the entire disproportionate war that Netanyahu has unleashed on the children in Gaza, on families in Gaza, in the name of war against terrorism. So I think what has happened today is that there is no normal, there is no global normal, there is no more a fixed world order. In Hindi, we say, "Jiski lathi uska bhains." Whoever owns the stick owns the buffalo. That's the only sort of foreign policy diktat that is happening around the world. So at the end of the day, I think there is this hardcore realization that India too, in its war against terrorism, while it can continue to go in with diplomatic measures, economic measures, when it comes to its military measures and this continued fight, whether it's against China at the line of actual control on the eastern borders or with Pakistan on the line of control on the western borders, India is on its own. It will have to build on its own defense industrial complex. It will have to strengthen its own internal security mechanisms. There are questions about intelligence failure on Pahalgam terrorist attack that have still not been answered by India's top leadership that need to be answered. We still haven't been able to nab the original attackers of the Pahalgam terrorist attack, unfortunately. So those questions will also have to be answered domestically instead of suppressing those questions or suppressing the right of the press to ask those questions by labeling them as anti-national. So it's a complex situation. It's a fluid situation, but I think there is a lot of awakening that has happened in a lot of dimensions here. Yes.
Well, that is a wonderful summation of the situation. We've got a couple of minutes left, I think. If have we got a couple?
I have to
No.
leave in 5
So,
minutes max.
in which case, I'm going to do a very quick one-question thing, which is to say, Shashi Tharoor, will he be thrown out of the Congress Party or not?
I don't think he'll be thrown out right away, because obviously, that would also give him the victim card. I mean, the BJP would ideally want him to be thrown out, but he's a man who has his own mind. And,
I hear he wants to be Chief Minister of Kerala under a BJP banner, the Indian media is saying.
No, that's not happening. I mean, the BJP is not going to win the state, honestly speaking. So you need those numbers to be able to win the state. And while Shashi Tharoor is very popular amongst the intellectuals and the elites, and global, if he was fighting maybe an election globally, with the global diaspora, there would be larger chances. Of course, he wins his seat. But Kerala, a state which is very strong when it comes to the communist ideologies, the communist regime, and the second in the ladder is actually the Congress there. It will be a while. I mean, the BJP has made inroads, but it will be a long time before the BJP can perhaps win the state. So Shashi Tharoor, I do feel, can be utilized far better by the Congress. The Congress also really acts very foolish at times.
Well, they didn't even recommend him for this international delegation, even though he's got such a high profile. Silly, very silly.
They could have saved themselves of this sort of political humiliation, whatever their thought process was. And this is a problem plaguing the Congress. At the end of the day, the Gandhi family that drives the Congress, Rahul Gandhi is the sign of the Congress. Even though you have a leader from the backward community, a strong party president today in Mallikarjun Kharge, the biggest problem of the Gandhi party family is that it's perceived to be insecure. That it doesn't.
But also, it was also the Gandhi party. People even call it the Gandhi party. But
so that's a huge baggage which Rahul Gandhi is not being able to, of course, get past. And while they performed much, much better in the last elections, where they had made the dangers to the constitution as the key campaign plank, and that's why they doubled their numbers in parliament. You have a much stronger opposition benches today compared to a year ago, where legislations were just being passed in parliament without any scrutiny, like you were selling pizza. It's so important to have a healthy opposition in a democracy. So despite what's happening in the United States internally, I still have my hopes, my bets on democracy surviving and institutions surviving. So let's hope. So I think the Congress also does make all of these mistakes, which is why so many of the talent pool has left the party, which could have been retained. But it's it's the politics of the day that is.
Well, we'll have to get you back on again to talk a little bit more about Indian domestic politics. But this has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you so much for taking the time to tell us about it, because as I said, it's not something we get enough on. I hope you'll visit us here in Australia sometime. Smita Sharma, thank you so much for being part of the podcast.
I really hope to, Jason. In fact, I was a part of the inaugural Australia-India Youth Dialogue. For your listeners who are not aware, it's a fantastic platform where we get in, youth, I think in the age group of 80, it's still 35 years or 40 years now, 20 people from India and Australia.
I think they raised the age limit to accept a few
Yeah, I
more
think
people.
they raised it from 35 to 40.
Yeah.
Or maybe because, at 40, you're still young. I mean, so,
well, yeah, I'm still out of that bracket as well.
So I went back to Australia 2 years ago as part of the inaugural Emerging Leaders Retreat, which was a separate vertical under AIYD. So we spent a lovely night in Lancefield in a vineyard. It was raining, and there were 10 of us alumni from the dialogue platform, Indians and Australians. It was a lovely time. I have so many friends there in Australia. So I wish, I hope that there is an opportunity for me to visit soon. And I hope to see you in person.
You will be most welcome anytime you can come. You'll be most welcome here, and certainly if I get back to India again soon, it'd be great to sit down and catch up with you properly. And visit Smita Sharma at her YouTube channel, because there's a lot of journalism there, and by the sounds of things, better keep it independent.
Thank you so much, and subscribe for independent journalism. Please support. That's the need of the hour. No free press means no democracy.
There you go. You heard it here first. Smita Sharma, thank you again for being part of the podcast.
Thank you. Bye. Namaskar.